Let's go through and look at some of the key features of the Lambda console. If we go back to Hello World, there's a few things to point out. First, there's a configuration menu. And what the configuration menu does is it allows you to decide what the inputs and the outputs are that are associated with your Lambda function. So in this case, we can see the Hello World is in the middle, and there are no triggers associated. And every time this Lambda function is called, it can actually go and send its messages to CloudWatch logs. So that's the output. If I wanted to add a trigger, though, what I could do is I could select a trigger, let's say CloudWatch events. Here we go. And that could go through and, let's say, run this function at some interval like this. And once I set up that trigger, now I have a trigger associated as well. So basically, I have the output here, I have the Lambda function, and I have the input. And again, you can have many triggers. So you can have one trigger would be a time, another trigger would be some kind of service, another trigger could be an API. So let's say conceivably you could have, let's say, 3 triggers to a Lambda function. That could be pretty straightforward. Another thing to be aware of as well is you can scroll through here and look at this monitoring section, and it will show you all of the different invocations that have occurred. So this is a great dashboard. It's almost like the dashboard on your car where you would have the speed and maybe how much oil you have and how much gas you have. You can see that I can tell how many times it's been invoked. It's only been invoked one time so far. I can see what the duration was, and this shows up in milliseconds. Here we go. I can see that it's a very short duration. And also, I can see the error or success. There's only been one, and it's got a success rate of 100%. And I can toggle through here as well to see different time intervals. So this is a great way to look through here and see what's happening with your Lambda function. And really, the error count and success rate percentage is probably one of the first areas to look at if you're going to have, if you have some kind of a problem with execution. That's one area. Also, duration could be one as well. So let's say you have a Lambda function and it actually exceeds the timeout. You'll see that it'll be very long, and you can see all the Lambda functions are basically exceeding that default 200 millisecond timeout. There's a few other ones as well. You can see, for example, if your Lambdas have been throttled, if you have set up some kind of concurrency throttling as well. So the monitoring section, again, is a great way to go through and look at really the visibility of what's happening in your Lambda function. Another thing to be aware of in terms of this console is that if you go back here to the configuration section, is that you also can edit the source code again by clicking on this Lambda, and then you can always edit it. And it's got a reasonably sophisticated IDE. We're going to go through actually a more comprehensive one in a bit, but it is worth pointing out that it will do syntax highlighting, and you have the ability to edit your source code in line. Another thing that you can do with this as well is you can set up more configuration about your application. So here's an example of if I wanted to set up environmental variables. Let's say the environmental variables could be what environment I'm in, for example. Let's say the production environment or the staging environment, or maybe some kind of metadata about my project. It would live inside of here. I also can tag it, and I could say for cost purposes, I could have the data science lambdas, I could have the data engineering lambdas, and I can have the sales or marketing lambdas. And this is a good practice to get into. And then in terms of execution role, this is the part that is really important to be aware of, is that if your Lambda needs to talk to another resource, let's say it's DynamoDB or it's S3, something like that, you're going to need to specifically add a role. So you're going to need to go through and add inside of the IAM policy that you want this Lambda to be able to access a particular resource. And so this is a common problem point for people getting used to Lambda, is that they forget that they have to add the ability for that Lambda function to talk to some service that they're associated with. A second item to be aware of is this basic settings section here. So by default, you get a timeout of 3 seconds, and it's really easy to exceed that if you have a more complicated Lambda. And so this might be something where you toggle through and you decide that maybe you want to have a 10-second timeout instead. Now, keep in mind that Lambdas, they work the best when they're really short. And so if you're doing something where it starts to get, let's say 30 seconds, or it starts to get into a longer time period, maybe there's a different approach other than just Lambda that you could think about, like AWS Batch or some other kind of long-range process. If I go to memory as well, it has a very small amount of memory, but I can toggle and add more memory to my Lambda. Let's say I'm doing image processing or something like that, and I get out of memory sections. I can actually go through here and toggle that up, and then you would probably want to go through and add like high memory, whatever it is you want to add for your custom settings here, and then they'll remember those settings on every execution. Another thing to be aware of inside of the console is this network section. So by default, you won't have a VPC, and depending on what you're doing, maybe you don't ever need to talk to the VPC because you can handle it all as, let's say, API requests. But if you are doing something more complicated, like talking to a relational database, you're going to have to hook it up to a VPC, and that does definitely increase the complexity of your Lambda function, because you're going to have to make sure you have the right subnet. You're going to have to make sure you've set up the right security group so you can talk to that AWS resource. So in general, it's probably easier to not use VPCs, but you do have that option, and you would have to configure that though through the console. As I mentioned earlier, Lambdas are highly concurrent, so you can by default use an unreserved account concurrency of 1,000, or you could reserve a very specific number. Let's say you want some other specific level of concurrency. You can actually set that right here. And then in terms of auditing and compliance, those all show up in CloudWatch logs. So if you go to not only CloudWatch logs but also CloudTrail itself, you can see who is actually executed each one of these Lambda functions. And again, that's all configured within the console. So that's really the highlight of the different aspects of this Lambda console. We also went through this earlier, but if you want to test things right here, this is the test mechanism. And from a nutshell, this is really the eyes and ears of how you initially would want to play around with the AWS console. And if you do even more sophisticated operations where you're using a cloud-based IDE, you still will want to go in here and make sure you tune things. So be aware of all those services inside of the console, and if you're able to toggle those features, you really will have full control over your development environment.